Hey guys, this is Fate over at Diablo3StrategyGuide.com, and today I'm going to be bringing you a brand new Witch Doctor build for the patch 1.04, and it's a kind of a hybrid build which combines zombie bears with pets. And it's a really cool build. People have been messing around with a lot of different specs for 1.04 because the Witch Doctor, of course, got changed so significantly, so people are still figuring out kind of how the mana regen works and stuff, but I really like this build. So a couple basic assumptions. We're going to assume level 60 in Inferno difficulty. We're also going to assume that you're comfortably geared up. And this build is really for farming and not for progression. And I'll address that a little bit later on in this video. But there are definitely some more optimal builds, especially for kiting, that are better to progress through this game. This is a build that you want to be doing in Act 2 and Act 3. In order to just look for that sick loot. Okay, some of the strengths. It has a huge damage output, very similar to VQ zombie bears in that respect. And of course, Vision Quest got nerfed significantly, so that build is no longer viable. Similarly, it has a great farming efficiency. And one of the big advantages is it's more robust, and a lot of that has to do with the changes that Blizzard made to the Witch Doctor in patch 1.04. Specifically, upping the inherent mana regen from 20 to 45, which really allows for a lot more diversity of builds, although it prevents you from having that ridiculous abundance of mana regeneration that you would with Vision Quest. And similar to VQ Zombie Bears, it's a great use of if you have really good gear, because it's simply one of the most efficient farming builds because of the raw, badass output of Zombie Bears. Alright, so we're going to get into a little bit of gameplay of me killing elites with this build. And so one of the first things that you'll notice is that the rhythm of the whole build is just very different from VQ Zombie Bears, despite using several of the same skills. And this is largely because in VQ you would have to use all your cooldowns, of course. So you would end up casting your Spirit Walk and then pretty much immediately soul harvesting whatever you could, and then using Hex or whatever skills you had that you needed to have on cooldown before spamming your bears. And here you have a lot more flexibility, and it basically improves a lot of your survivability and gives you a lot more options depending on the situation. So this build actually reminds me a little bit more of how the 5 cooldown Firebats build played out with Vision Quest, because simply you have a lot more options. And usually what I like to do is be very aggressive with my Soul Harvest and cast that first, and then kind of use the Spirit Walk with the Honored Guest rune for some additional mana regeneration to allow you to really finish off your enemies. You'll also notice in a lot of these clips, I'm moving very aggressively towards the elite mobs, and I am certainly overgeared for this situation, and that's kind of the assumption I have made in this video, is that you're really looking to farm and you have pretty good gear. And that's because of the passive skill Gruesome Feast, which basically improves your intelligence as well as gives you some mana regeneration as you pick up health globes. And so one interesting variation, and I haven't had a chance to gear for this quite yet just because it's been so early on in the patch, is to get a little bit of a pickup radius so you can just automatically pick up those globes, so you don't have to be so aggressive and move basically right on top of your enemies like I'm doing there. But one of the nice things about the pets, and because they actually survive in Inferno now, is that you can actually get right up and close, and you can see me right here just all on top of it, grabbing those health globes as they come. And that just, if you ever open up the inventory tab and look at your DPS during these battles, you'll see that it rapidly increases, and I think I only have something like 55,000 unbuffed DPS, but it can go all the way up to about 115, 120,000, depending on how successful my Soul Harvest as well as the globe pickup has been. Kind of the other important component to this build is kind of how you break down the mana regeneration. And that's one of the most interesting kind of problems for the Witch Doctor in general. And I think it's the reason why the Witch Doctor in general has not been as popular as the Wizard, who has a very simple and much quicker regenerating mana source or arcane power. In general, depending on which wizard build you selected, you wouldn't even necessarily have to gear for anything special such as arcane power on crit. Of course, the exception is the critical mass builds, which have really gained a lot of popularity recently. But for the Witch Doctor, you almost always had to gear for mana regeneration unless you were doing a really basic build like Splinters or a Spiders build or something like that. So it was just kind of a more tricky gearing situation. And other factors such as Vision Quest really factor into that. And so for here, I'm not using Vision Quest, and Zombie Bears is actually the only damage skill I have, and I'm using Blood Ritual, which basically pays some of your mana costs with life, and it's a really small amount of life, so it rarely makes any sort of impact on your survivability, and it helps to really smooth out that mana regen. I am not using Pierce the Veil in here in this build. I have experimented a little bit with it, but I tend to like the more steady damage output rather than, oh, I have mana and I do a lot of damage, or I don't have it and I'm not doing any damage at all. So that's kind of a personal preference thing, and depending on your gear level, Pierce the Veil would basically help you do more strong bursts of damage, but you wouldn't be able to do a consistent stream. So in a lot of ways, the pets in this build are not at all for DPS, and they're more for to use as tanks. And because they allow you to get so close to your enemies with Zombie Bears without taking damage, it works really well for the skill because it has such low range. If you are undergeared, I would recommend using something more like Spirit Barrage or Fire Bats to do a similar type build with pets. Pets in general have just been dramatically improved with the latest patch. One other interesting variation I've seen on this build is basically to use Life on Hit gear as well as Acid Rain, which has a really good proc rate in order to slowly gain back that life. And so I've seen that to be really effective, but because my gear is relatively strong, I tend to go for the more raw, higher DPS output route. Okay, so I hope you guys enjoyed this build breakdown. It's the first Witch Doctor and Wizard build I've broken down for 1.04. So please check out the corresponding article, including information on how to gear for this build on Diablo3strategyguide.com, as well as check out our YouTube channel. And thanks for watching, guys.